The idea of wilderness needs no defense. It only needs more defenders. Remaining silent about the destruction of nature is endorsing that destruction. Edward Abbey. Now, Mr. Abbey was known as the last true anarchist of the American Southwest, a poet, author, environmentalist, and yes, he played the flute. An obstinate environmentalist, he believed entirely in the ideals his books represented, and he believed that the only way to oppose a corrupt authority was to do so fully. Well, by now, I believe I have you wondering what it is I'll be speaking about today. And for that, I'll turn to my personal definition of inertia, which is the tendency of something to continue its current action unless some significant force is acted upon it. Inertia in the world of the environment tends to be both beneficial and negative. The debate is over whether there's too much inertia behind continuing with our current destructive practices, or whether it can be overcome. First off, I'll tell you my own tale in the land of Edward Abbey's writing. I got the chance to float the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon, and yes, I did fall off the boat mere seconds after this picture. There, I was told the tale of Glen Canyon Dam, which is a hydroelectric dam and the reservoir behind it, created to manage the Colorado River and produce livelihoods in the southwestern desert. Every single one of the guides on the trip complains about the dam, going so far as to say they wish someone would just blow it up. An act of ecoterrorism more akin to an Edward Abbey novel than any real wish to cause damage. However, they say that even though the river is better managed now, it lacks the wild spirit the mighty Colorado once had, so much so that the Colorado River hadn't reached the Gulf of Mexico since 1970 until efforts allowed for it in 2018. Which takes me to what we can do about these issues. Simply put, there isn't much that each of us can do. This infographic is similar to many others of the same theme. This one specifically was funded almost entirely by a think tank funded by British Petrol. They tweeted out this image and a link to a carbon calculator, which calculates your carbon emissions and what you can do to reduce them. I'm not trying to say here that each of us shouldn't be doing the things on that list of carbon footprint reduction, because honestly, it would help the climate crisis quite a bit if we were all to follow that list. But what I am trying to say is that in this case, the list acts as a distraction from the real problem. As you can see here, BP spends millions of dollars each year actively denying climate change. There are a variety of reasons for you to change how you impact the world's carbon footprint. But your footprint doesn't really compare to groups much larger than yourself. While humans across the earth were stuck inside because of the coronavirus, the total amount of CO2 emissions went down only 11%. Should you worry about that? Should you be angry about that? The answer to both, I personally believe, is yes. I just don't want you to only act like you care. Performative activism is the concept of participating in activist movements in a more theatrical rather than functional way. Think examples like social media influencers that give money to homeless people on camera, or celebrities supporting a campaign for the image rather than the cause, or this image here, which says they'll donate $1 for every 100 reposts of this image. It's an issue often brought up by the Native communities that I have worked with in the past, who say people are inspired by their practices while still living consumerist lifestyles and taking the imagery that is sacred to them. I myself, like many others I'm sure, have felt it was easier to sign a petition than to actually put in the work to get that petition signed. I promised that I would speak about the loss of natural territory. So here we go. Since 2001, the United States has lost more than 24 million acres of natural land. That is the equivalent of 9 Grand Canyon national parks, or the entire country of Hungary. According to Reuters, this is due to the land being used for urban sprawl, agriculture, or energy production. The truth of the matter, however, is that during this time, the US government has been actively supporting ventures that use the natural land in this way. The tropics, in 2019, lost an average of 30 football fields worth of trees per minute, according to the World Wildlife Fund. The traditional land of the Hadza people in Tanzania have seen a 3-fold increase in the population of their lands and thus development in the last 25 years, according to the Nature Conservancy. I want to show you how important natural land is, both to me and the world. After all, almost the entirety of the world's biodiversity is found in natural land rather than in human development. In terms of the climate crisis, it is natural areas that account for most of the global carbon sequestration. There's this belief that without natural spaces, human stress is increased by a great factor, something I believe many here could agree with. Not only that, but there's a reason these spaces are the most exploited in the world. It is what humans were born into, but also what led to our rise as a species. Without these natural spaces, humans wouldn't have gotten into a capacity whereby they are now capable of exploiting them. And okay, so they're important to our history as a species, and they have a lot of animals. But ultimately, human progress should be allowed to utilize available spaces, right? I'm afraid to say, however, that that decision doesn't lie with you. That question is answered, rather, by policymakers who are influenced by corporate lobbying or interests. For example, under the direction of Bolsonaro, the president of Brazil, the Amazon rainforest has become more and more developed at the expense of environmental protections. The Guardian reports that fires in the Amazon were 3 times as likely to happen near beef-producing areas. And under new environmental policies, that land has to be used for something, often meaning the same beef industry obtains that land. Did they start the fires? We don't know. However, even the creation of an Amazon Council has been described as pure public relations by Rubens Wiquerpo, the former environmental minister of Brazil. The same holds true across the world, where governments like my home country of the United States have put in policies meant to placate the public on environmental matters. In the United States, President Biden signed an end to the Keystone Pipeline XL, finishing a multi-year debate while still allowing the Dakota Access Pipeline construction to continue because the project had already progressed too far. The continuation of governments bowing to corporate interests should outrage you because it ultimately means that in important cases, your voices are often being ignored. So what can you do? That's the question that needs to be asked. What is it that you can actually do about this issue? And now for the truth that I think you can all see that we've been working towards. There is something you can do. I'm not going to get totally hopeless on you. Yes, the world only has 30 years to reverse the effects of climate change. Yes, the amount of wild space in the world decreases by whole percentages each year. And yes, there don't seem to be a lot of people in power who actually want to help. But there are a lot of people capable of making change, as long as it's meaningful. The advice I can give is not to ignore the "what can you do for climate change" posters, or to stop posting about the loss of wild space around the globe. Just don't let it distract you. The real effort that needs to be made is in changing the policy and practices of society as a whole. I understand that not every one of you is going to be able to protest on the front lines of the Amazon, or go on to be lawmakers that are different. And there are 1,000 issues that are just as pressing as the environment. But you are also uniquely situated at a time in history where you can make some of the greatest differences. I'll share with you now one of the greatest conservation stories I have heard. So great, in fact, that it was told around a campfire despite its political nature. In 1907, the executive power